whole of human history is full of secrets and mysteries. In fact, even now, in the age of science and technology, our whole world order is causing thousands of questions, many of which cannot be fully answered by scientists. Time Puzzle Crew tries to uncover some of those mysteries surrounding the mysterious places of Kazakhstan.
In Kazakhstan, there are many cities with a rich and interesting history. One of them is Kyzylorda. The city survived in its time a lot of events that radically changed its life. Founded in 1818, very soon it will celebrate its bicentennial. Kyzylorda originated not in an empty place in the steppe. From ancient times, this region was considered the heart of the Turkic world. Here the Kokand Khan founded his fortress and gave it the name of Akhmechet. Later it was won by the Russian general Perovsky. But very few people know that after many years, Kyzylorda was going to play a very important role in the history of our country when the Russian Empire fell and it was replaced by the communists, who were actively undertaking the development of this region. Watch in today's episode how Soviet regime came to Kyzylorda. When the Bolsheviks, for example, became more active, proclaimed power to the workers, land to the peasants, it was natural to expect that workers everywhere, including the railways, will support new trends, new slogans. The history of Kyzylorda railway station and people who worked here. My attention was attracted by this tool. It's called a paw. Its weight is about 50 kilograms. Now I'm going to tell you what it is used for. Which city became the first capital of Kazakh Republic? There were proposals to choose Tashkent as the capital. Some suggested Semipalatinsk. The unknown history of Kyzylorda. Watch in this episode. There are many cities with rich and interesting history in Kazakhstan. One of them is Kyzylorda. Today we'll try to tell you the history of this little town. My name is Andrei Slozhin and this is the Time Puzzle. According to researchers of historians, there were capitals of different peoples in different times in the Sirdarya region. A lot of historically important events happened that influenced the formation of the self-awareness of the peoples living in this region, which spread far beyond modern Kazakhstan. About what happened on the site of the Kyzylorda region many centuries ago, we were told by the head of the excursion department of the Kyzylorda Regional Museum of Local History, Elzira Sagejanova.
Ең алғашқы астанамыз сақ тайпаларының астанасы болған біздің заманымызға дейінгі 4-ші.
The very first capital of the Saka tribes, 4th to 2nd centuries BC. It originates from the city of Chirikrabat, which was the capital of the Saka tribes. In general, the very first capital, city of Chirikrabat, was first discovered in 1949 by the famous Khwarezm archaeological and ethnographic expedition. The expedition was supervised by Tolstov. This is our first capital. And the second capital of the Sirdarya region, the capital of the Oguz tribe, the city where Kokit Ata lived in 5th, 11th centuries, is the city of Tashkent. It was the capital of the Oguz tribes. And the third capital was the capital of the Kipchak tribes. Later it was the capital of Akoda. After that, it was the capital of the Kazakh Khanate, the city of Siganak. The city of Siganak is located 15 kilometers from Jana-Kogan district. It also was a trading port. It is located along the Silk Road. The city of Siganak, which strengthened cultural and political ties. Hundreds of years later, in the land of the Saka and Oguz tribes, a new red capital of Kazakhstan will emerge. It will be named Kyzylorda. But before becoming the main city of the republic, it will go a long way in terms of people's lives and insignificant, according to historical standards. First, the Kokand ruler Omar Khan ordered the fort to be laid here in order to ensure the security of his rule in the region. Akhmechet, now Kyzylorda, has a very rich history. The city of Akhmechet, which has 200 years of history, it was founded in 1817, and in the beginning it was named Kamis Kala, Reed Town. In 1817, the city was conquered by the Kokand people, and they built the fortress Akhmechet for the Kokand Khan Omar. In the center of the fortress, a white mosque was built. In this regard, the city was named as Akhmechet. The fortress belonged to the Kokands until 1853. At that moment, it was under the direction of Yakub Bek, but because of the excessive tax established by the Kokand for the Kazakhs living in this region, a confrontation begins. Just in this period, pursuing political goals, Governor General Perovsky comes here with his army. The Kazakhs unite with the army of Perovsky and begin the siege of Akhmechet. After Perovsky's victory over the Kokand, the city was given the name of a victorious Governor General. An Orthodox church, a mosque, a barracks, a school for military children were built here. Later, a brick factory, pharmacies, new streets and houses appeared. The city began to expand. In order to establish the already in-demand communication with Perovsk, in 1868 the first post office was opened in the city. In general, in pre-revolutionary Kazakhstan there were 250 telegraph and postal enterprises. In the villages there was no mail. It was connected with the fact that, according to the rules of that time, to open a post office in the locality, local residents had to transport mail for themselves for 3 years, provide and maintain premises, and also serve the staff of postal workers. Everything changed with the construction of the Orenburg Tashkent Railway. The head of the Department of Ethnography and Archaeology of the Kyzylorda Regional Museum of Local History, Askat Saylau, told us about this. At the end of the 19th century, the Russian Empire proposed building a railroad between Russia and Tashkent, which would connect them with the Middle Asia. These works began at the time of Emperor Alexander III, but the work was not finished. The beginning of the construction of the first road in the Turkestan region can be considered 1880. Then it was called the Trans-Caspian Military Road. The iron rails connected the ports of the Caspian Sea and Kyzyl-Avad, now Sardar, a city in Turkmenistan. Due to the construction of this highway, the project of building the Orenburg Tashkent road froze until 1900. But the talks about the construction of the railway were still conducted. For example, on June the 16th, 1889, the Tsarist government convened a special meeting to discuss the issue of building a road to Central Asia. The military minister, General Kuropatkin, insisted on building a line from Orenburg to Tashkent. He was supported by the foreign and finance ministers. They offered to pave the road from Saratov through Charju. In their opinion, such a road would make a huge impression on Europe. That proposal was ignored for 11 years. Only in 1900, in April, at a regular meeting, the Emperor Nicholas II imposed a resolution on this question. I prefer the Orenburg-Tashkent direction at the present moment. On April the 26th, 1901, the necessary technical conditions for the design and construction of the Orenburg-Tashkent road were submitted to the State Council. The road passed through the largest settlements at that time: Iletsk, Aktubinsk, Chelka, Kazalinsk, Perovsk, Joly, Turkestan and Aris. The building was divided into 2 sections. And it began in 1901. This place is divided into 2 regions, northern and southern. In 1901, the construction began on the side of Orenburg from the north and from the south from Tashkent. And in 1906, in April, in Kazan near Kobek stations, 2 ways of railroads joined together. The railway was being built for 5 years. The northern section of the road, which ran from Orenburg to Kazalinsk, was 946 versts, or 1,009 kilometers long. The southern part from Tashkent to Kazalinsk was 790 versts, or 843 kilometers. Construction was carried out in difficult climatic conditions, as well as unfavorable in terms of geographical location. Constant sandstorms, wind, water shortages and high cost of materials are just a small part of the difficulties that the builders had to face. To solve the problem with sand drifts and soil shedding, several options have been developed. On the way, roads were planted with a camel's thorn and saxaul. Sand clay was poured over sandy dunes, wooden barriers were placed. All this increased the cost of construction by several times, but no one intended to abandon the new railway. The construction of the Orenburg Tashkent Railway caused the construction of the railway station and depot in the city of Perovsk in 1900. Construction took 5 years. In the same period, a pharmacy and an outpatient clinic were opened. The connection of the two construction sections of the road occurred in October 1905 at the Jibek crossing on the territory of the present Kyzylorda region. The road was handed over for permanent operation on April 1st, 1906.
Енді осы теміржолдың салынуына байланысты осы сол уақыттағы архитектуралық стильмен, орыс архитектуралық стильмен осы біздің вокзалдар салынды.
After the railway was built, according to the architectural style of that time, the stations began to be built. Now the station is a cultural and historical monument, one of the rare objects. The plan of the station was created in honor of Catherine II. Great Station in Kazalinsk is a second-class station, and our station is the third class. The population of the city also increased. At that time in the city, there were 8,328 people. Such data are given in church books of the city of Perovsk. In addition, a huge number of experts from Russia arrived to the region. They traveled here for the high salary that the government of that time paid. A simple worker servicing railway received 20 rubles a day, about 30,000 tenge modern money transfer. After the station, Perovskoye Depot was built. A depot was built in Joly, in Kazalinsk, at the station of Saxaul II. There were no specialists, they came from Russia. They moved to our regions in order to create conditions for them. Schools and pharmacies were opened. Houses were built for the depot workers. It is a museum of Locomotive Depot of Kyzylorda. There are a lot of exhibits, but my attention was attracted by this tool. It's called a paw. Its weight is about 50 kilograms. Now I'm going to tell you what it is used for. It is a model of the Locomotive Depot in the city of Perovsk, where steam locomotives were repaired. But before getting there, it was driven to a special platform. Next, with the help of paws, the platform was turned into the desired compartment and the engine drove inward. This was done manually, because at that time there were no special electrical devices. In 1906, more than 160 employees were registered in the Locomotive Depot of Perovsk. Many workers came here from Samara, Saratov and Voronezh. They were hereditary railwaymen. A year later, an accident occurred in the Locomotive Depot. At the end of May, people stopped working, demanding to raise their salaries and remove the acting head of the depot, sent from Orenburg. It was such a bright event in Perovsk that they even wrote about it in the newspaper Tashkent Courier. On May the 28th at 12 noon, all the work stopped at the local depot. Not a single worker from 166 people showed up on the draft. The storm was coming gradually. From the middle of April, a new chief of the depot, Mr. Karl, was sent to us. Obviously, according to the proverb that a new broom sweeps clean, Mr. Karl at the very beginning began to show his activity on the skinny pockets of workers. The question quickly decided and the city went back to a calm and measured life. But only until the moment when the Russian Empire did not get involved in the First World War. And then the Red Wave came to the small town. The royal decree of June the 25th, 1916 on the mobilization of all men between the ages of 18 and 43 led to an uprising in this region. It began a month after the decree was issued. A year later, the meeting of the Perovsk Soviet of Workers and Soldiers Deputies passed a decision to transfer power to the Soviets. Thus began a new historical period for the people of Perovsk. The city with the population of more than 10,000 people. The most conscious, organized part of the population is the workers. And they heard about the processes that took place in the central part of Russia. When the Bolsheviks, for example, became more active, proclaimed power to the workers, land to the peasants, it was natural to expect that workers everywhere, including the railways, would support new trends and new slogans. The huge territory, almost 600 square meters, became later a place for serious revolutionary battles. Moreover, the first revolutionaries of the region were railway workers. In April 1917, the first Bolshevik group led by Alexander Chervyakov was organized in Perovsk. It consisted of 38 people.
В 1917 году в октябре месяце именно вот в этом крае.
In 1917, in October, it was here in this region that the first city where Soviet power was established was Perovsk. That's just the reason for this fact. There were workers who worked on the railway, and they held a new power. This was October the 30th, 1917. The process of transferring power was quite simple. Jibek established the Provisional Organizational Railway Committee, at which the temporary railway commissioner Peter Kobozev was elected. Immediately, the chief of the road and the head of the traffic service were removed from their posts. The peculiarity of this revolution, let's say seizing power, is that the seizure of power took place quite peacefully. There were own leaders among the workers who welcomed the ideas of Bolshevism. And just the power was seized without blood. The revolution was without blood. But it was not everywhere. With the arrival of the Soviets in the region, hostilities began. Central Asia plunged into civil war. As a result of armed clashes, the Bolsheviks established their authority in the Turkestan and Urals regions. Relatively peaceful revolutions took place in Tashkent, Auliye-Ata, Bukeyev-Hord, Turkestan, Kazalinsk, Kokchetav and Akmolensk. The change in power was most difficult in the Orenburg, Urals and Semirechye regions. Nevertheless, by March 1918, almost the entire territory of Kazakhstan was under the guidance of the Soviets.
Енді бұл жерде жалпы временный правительство, уақытша үкімет, большевиктердің үкіметі болды ғой. Уақытша үкімет.
Here was the interim government, the Bolshevik government.
Соғыс бұл қалай болады енді?
The interim government and the Bolshevik government fought among themselves. The bourgeoisie supported the interim government, the poor, the workers and peasants supported the Bolsheviks. Few people know, but in 1922 the town of Perovsk returned its old name, Akhmechet. It was actual until 1925, when the city was given familiar to us name Kyzylorda. Then it became the first capital of Kazakh ASSR. The history of Kyzylorda, it is interesting because it was the first capital of Kazakhstan, among the cities located on the territory of Kazakhstan. Naturally, the first capital in the Soviet period was Orenburg. Orenburg is the capital of Kyrgyz autonomy, which was founded in 1920. And since 1925, the capital was moved to Kyzylorda. For the present time, for future generations, it will be significant that who did it, who initiated the transfer to Kyzylorda, why did this happen? The transfer of the center of the Kazakh, or as it was said then, the Kyrgyz Autonomous Socialist Soviet Republic, from the city of Orenburg to the still Akhmetchet was approved by the decision of the Kyrgyz Central Executive Committee on February the 9th, 1925. On February the 9th, 1925, the resolution said that the capital must be transferred to the Akhmetchet, as well as to create a special commission to examine the city. The chairman of the commission was appointed deputy chairman of the Council of People's Commissars, Abylai Serkaziev. But there was one more version about which very few people know. A native of Kyzylorda told us about it. The person who knows the history of his city and has worked for many years as its Akim, Nukan Joly.
Представители Алаш-Орды в лице ее лидеров, того же Байтурсынова.
The representative of the Alash Horde, its leaders, the same Baitursinov, Bukeykanov, or other leaders of the Soviet government, Shovanov, Kodjaev, they advocated that the capital be transferred to Perovsk.
Была перенесена в Перовск. Перовск. Почему? Потому что
Perovsk. Why? Because the city of Orenburg was in the interior of the Russian Empire. There were many imperial institutions of power, and already in the Soviet period, of course, the institutions of Soviet power, which were easily coordinated, their actions were easily coordinated from the capital of Moscow, from St. Petersburg, from the center, let's say. Therefore, the leaders of the Kazakh nationals tried more to go deep into Kazakhstan in order to be less in the field of vision of the center. Be that as it may, the transfer of the capital began after the February meeting headed by Serkaziev. At the meeting, he proposed the creation of another, a technical commission. It was headed by Aspandiar Kenjin. He went with 5 other companions to Akhmetchet to understand the condition of the settlement, to inspect buildings, water supply, heating system, as well as street lighting. The commission arrived in the city on February the 23rd, 1925. In fact, Akhmetchet was not the only contender for the role of the capital of the Republic. There were proposals to choose Tashkent as the capital. Some suggested Semipalatinsk. But Semipalatinsk wasn't chosen. Why? Because it was the center of the Alash movement in 1917, 1918 and 1919. But after 1919, when the leaders of the Alash conspired to collusion, they were compelled to conspire with the Soviet authorities after it became clear that White Guardism in the person of General Dutov is already retreating. They're already retreating, leaving, and they will not return. The leaders of the Alash audience began to contact the Soviet authorities. Well, just for that reason, Semipalatinsk wasn't chosen. Why? Because it was the center of the Alash movement. The report of the commission was disappointing. Lack of water supply and lighting in the streets, garbage, which the locals throw directly behind the fences. It was decided to create another committee that could solve these problems. So on June the 17th, 1925, a construction committee was formed headed by the same Abylai Serkaziev. The city was divided into 2 parts, the new and the old. In the new part, the construction of state institutions and houses for their employees was planned. In the old, residential buildings, parks and recreation.
Город был совсем маленький, порядка 10-15 тысяч человек. Не было, как я уже сказал, инфраструктуры.
The city was quite small, about 10 to 15,000 people. There was, as I said, no infrastructure. There were no roads, there were no simple paved streets, there was no water. Yes, it was located on the shore of the Sirdarya, but there were no water communications right to the city. There was absolutely no electricity, and naturally, the climatic conditions were quite complex. sharply continental weather, a very hot summer and a fairly cold winter. Plus to all this constant dust, winds and dust. All this was quite disappointing. But nevertheless, the decision was made, and by the decision of the Council of People's Commissars, the government of the Russian Federation, the appropriate funds were given, a special commission was set up, which arrived in Kyzylorda in the first half of the year and began the process of settlement. This commission has done a great job. Construction of facilities finished in amazingly short time. Thus, by the end of the autumn of 1925, buildings for state institutions, schools as well as apartment houses for employees of state structures were commissioned. According to the party leaders of the city at that time, the first months were the most difficult. The shortage of materials, labor and money extended the construction time. They reported back to the top that the building was late with the schedule, although by modern standards it was quite a good pace.
Совет үкіметі ол 1960 жылдан кейін 11 жылдан кейін орнады.
Soviet power came 11 years after 1905. After the railroad was built, the economy began to grow here. Trade began to develop. Goods were delivered from Middle Asia to Russia, quickly and in a short time. In the time of the Bolsheviks, the city did not develop as rapidly as during the Russian empires. Only after it became the capital in 1925, the city of Kyzylorda began to develop. They built different buildings, libraries, theaters and schools. In the summer of 1925, the 5th Congress of the Kazakh ASSR was held, at which 3 fateful decisions were made for the whole country. The first was the transfer of the capital from Orenburg to Akhmechet. The second was the renaming of Akhmechet to Kyzylorda. And the third was the decision to restore justice and return to the people their historical name, Kazakhs, instead of Kyrgyz. Accordingly, the republic was renamed the Kazakh ASSR.
3 вот этих факта, которые произошли в тот период.
These are the 3 facts that occurred during that period. And going back to the period of the capital, it should be said that although the decision was made to move the capital from Orenburg to Kyzylorda, this was a very difficult decision. A difficult decision in terms of the fact that the city was not provided with infrastructure. Yes, it had the railway, let's say it was along the railway, along the river. It provided the national aspirations to the Kazakh leaders of the time by the fact that the city was located in the Sirdarya region. And the Sirdarya is considered to be the foremother of the Kazakhs. Alash. Alash is usually called Sirdarya. In this respect, there really was some kind of ecstasy. However, the city itself was under a disadvantage. The Construction Commission in the course of the city's survey came to the conclusion that the country town is too small for the capital. Therefore, studies were carried out on nearby territories and a plan was drawn up to expand the boundaries of the city, designed for 40 years. Despite such active measures, Kyzylorda remained the main city of the republic for a short time. 4 years after receiving the status, the capital was transferred to Alma-Ata. It happened in 1929.
Енді жалпы бұл жердің несі бірінші табиғат, климаты сәйкес келмейді. Екінші бұл жер жалпы қазіргі тарихшыларымыз.
First of all, the climate did not match. According to the research of current historians, this place was not suitable for the capital. The climate was inappropriate. Desert, hot weather, no conditions.
Несі болған жоқ дейсің. Жағдай болған жоқ ешқандай.
The main historical version of the transfer of the capital to Alma-Ata is the economic factor. The Council of Labor and Defense decided to build the Turkestan-Siberian Railway. Few people know, but the fate of Kyzylorda as the capital of Kazakh ASSR was already predetermined 2 years after its appointment as the main city of the Republic. This happened on March 2nd, 1927, at the meeting of the Central Executive Committee and the Council of People's Commissars of the Kazakh ASSR. And the move itself took place in 1929, because it was timed to the beginning of the regular movement of trains on Turk-Sib. The country's leadership and representatives of government agencies arrived in Almaty on the test train of the Trans-Siberian Railway, which was under construction. Kyzylorda becomes the center of the district. Depriving the city of the status of the capital did not greatly affect the lives of its inhabitants. The city continued to build new buildings. Many migrants from different regions of the country came here. January the 15th, 1933 formed the Kyzylorda region, and the city receives the status of a regional center. Calm and measured life again continued until the Great Patriotic War. It was a difficult time for everyone, but after the victory of the Soviet Union over fascist Germany, the whole country was recovering heavily. Vladimir Tolokonnikov, a native of the city, told us about how the Kyzylorda people lived then. There was great poverty at that time. In any situation, it is necessary to talk about this, of course. We rejoiced for a piece of sugar, a piece of flat cake, or a Kazakh bausag. We lived as one family. Huge yards were here, not like modern ones. Huge yards where lived 14 to 15 families of many nationalities. During the war years, many hospitals were evacuated to Kyzylorda. Here, soldiers and officers were treated. According to historical data, until the end of 1941, 13,110 such places were deployed in Kazakhstan, of which 2,000 were in Kyzylorda. A huge number of medicines were sent to the front, including the so-called hematogen, which was needed for wounded people. Its main production was conducted in Almaty, Uralsk and Kyzylorda. Unfortunately, the history of military hospitals in the territory of Kyzylorda and the region is not fully understood. The reason is that all documents about these institutions are kept in Tashkent, since the Kyzylorda hospitals were in the department of the evacuation point number 60, which was in the capital of the Uzbek ASSR. This information was learned in the Kyzylorda Regional Museum of History and Local Law. It is the Regional Kyzylorda Museum of Local History. It was founded in 1939. The first exposition was located in the temple of the Perovskaya Kazan Virgin. The most valuable exhibits were the armor of Batirs and cannon barrels, which were used for the capture of the fortress Ak-Mechet.
Храм был в 1933 году закрыт, и отдали его только...
The temple was closed in 1933, and only in 1990 the temple was given back. And here lived the repressed, those who were deported from Russia. And after the war, somewhere in the 70s, there was a museum of local law.
В 50-х годах был краеведческий музей.
In 1980, the museum was given a two-story building by the decision of the Executive Committee of the Regional Council of People's Deputies, which, by the way, is also an architectural monument of the 50s of the 20th century. The fund of the Regional Museum of History and Local Law holds 51,239 exhibits, of which 28,923 in the main fund. Here, subjects of ethnography and archaeology, jewelry, rare books and manuscripts that tell the history of the region are concentrated. If we talk about historical and cultural monuments of the city of Kyzylorda, there are more than 80 historical places here. And the most ancient places are the Aytpay Mosque, the barracks building and this church, and Al-Assad, the Regional Museum of Local Law, and the railway station building. Kyzylorda land is rich for historical and architectural monuments. A huge amount of evidence telling the history of this land since the Saka times and ending with modernities concentrated in the city and in the region. There are a huge number of mausoleums, ancient fortifications, ancient buildings and beautiful modern monuments. This is only a small part of the interesting information about the city of Kyzylorda. Surely these places contain a lot of historical facts which will be studied. My name is Andrei Slozhin and it was The Time Puzzle. See you.